So, Evan, thank you so much for making yourself available for the Investors Podcast.
My pleasure.
So the very first question, upon graduation, you spent 8 years at Oracle, first as a software engineer, and then later you served as a vice president. I think most people would say you made it, like keep climbing that corporate ladder. Why did you start your own company in the first place?
Yeah, well, there's a couple reasons. It was 1995, so it was sort of the advent of the internet. It had been only a couple years since most of us had sort of experienced the internet for the first time. So I just saw incredible opportunity there. It was clear to me that it did sort of change everything. I know that's a cliche, but I could tell that there were amazing opportunities out there, and I wanted to take advantage of them. And it was a time that I'd learned a ton from my first job, and I thought I could bring it to bear on solving some interesting problems.
So what did you see? You saw some indications that there was a massive opportunity out there, but what did you see?
Well, just that everyone was so connected. It was possible to get information out to people in a new format as easily as possible. And so for me, what I'd been working on, one of the last things I worked on at Oracle was Larry's interactive television effort. A lot of times he's right on target with a lot of his ideas about how things are changing the world, but he was a little early on this one. I remember watching video on demand, as it were, in 2008, 15 years later, and going, oh yeah, okay, we were only 15 years off. But that notion of everybody being connected and being able to control more of what they see, everything we take for granted now that, in my generation, we sort of tease our kids about that they are so reliant on, but that we didn't have, that when we drove in a car, like if we wanted to talk to someone, we had to stop the car, we had to hope that we had change, and we had to go to a phone booth and call them, and hope that they were at home, because that was the only place you could talk to people on the phone. So, just the fact that the world was getting way more connected, and for me, what was interesting, because kind of my career had been animated by this idea that we could bring powerful capabilities to sort of ordinary end users. That's what I sort of saw, is that these powerful applications, business applications, other types of applications could be brought in a really compelling way to end users all over the world with the internet. So that's what sort of animated me in thinking I wanted to do something on my own.
And tell us about your very first company, because it was far away from NetSuite.
Yeah, well, so I've been involved in this sort of multimedia stuff with the interactive television, and I wanted to bring more compelling experiences to people. One of the things that caused the internet to take off was just that, as legend has it, Mark Andreessen decided he'd put pictures into HTML pages and the browser. And so for me, it was more interactive content, and some of the stuff we take for granted now that you can use in web pages. It was sort of really popularized by Flash. That was the same kind of thing that we were trying to do, just make websites more interactive, easier for people to use. So take some of that power, these really powerful systems, and use the internet and multimedia and animation and interactivity to make it come alive. Now, unfortunately, there was another company that had that idea. They were called Future Splash, and they were eventually bought by Macromedia at the time, which is now Adobe, to create Flash. And Macromedia really had the audience of multimedia and interactive developers, and so they really sort of took over that market. And then, so after about 3 years of running that company, while we had a very devoted following, it was pretty clear to me that it wasn't going to take off like I hoped.
So tell us about that process of doing that pivot. Like how obvious was it that it was going that route and going into business software?
Well, so this was my first company. I was CEO. We had about 15 people, and I learned about running a company. I'd run a group at Oracle, and I'd been a manager, but it's a little different when you have to make payroll, you have to raise money, you have to, you're really on your own out there. And so one of the things you hope to do is sort of run your business based on data. You want to know what's happening, what's working, what's not working. A lot of the things I've talked about today, and getting that visibility into what's happening in your company. And so as I was running my company, and we were sort of a traditional software company, it was not the advent of software as a service had not happened yet, and that was sort of what NetSuite tapped into. But we were delivering traditional software, but we were running our operation off of like a smorgasbord of applications. So we had QuickBooks for finance, and we were using Yahoo stores to distribute our packaged software, and we used a packaged sales automation tool. It wasn't even an automation tool, more of a contact management tool. We did our support in email. So the data was everywhere. It was not integrated. We had 5 different customer lists, and it definitely appeared to me that there had to be a better way. So that's what really caused the pivot. And I was lucky enough that Larry Ellison actually helped me with this company, even though it was more, it was sort of my idea. His later joke was, well, we did your idea, now we'll do my idea. And I told, he called, because he'd periodically call and he'd say, how's your graphics stuff going? Because that's how he sort of summed it up. And I said, not great. We're kind of getting clobbered by the competition, but I see this other kind of direction, and I really want to get involved in business software, because I sort of imagined that bigger companies had all these great systems to run their business and get an integrated view of what's happening in their business. And that wasn't even necessarily true. That's how I sort of imagined it. But it was certainly true, and it was very clear to me that smaller businesses did. So it was in the course of a 5-minute phone conversation that Larry and I decided that we'd go in a different direction, and that I'd start NetSuite. It was called NetLedger at the time. And it really was his insight that I knew that small businesses needed a bunch of different types of systems, and that we wanted to work together. That was sort of my insight. His insight was that really the best way to start, and he said, if I were to start a company right now, it would be sort of small business accounting delivered as a web service, as a web application. And I said, well, I don't really know that much about accounting, but I can see how accounting would be important, but I really want to get into sales software delivered over the web, because I think that's kind of what I wanted to know as a business owner was, where's my next deal coming from? What's my pipeline look like? And he said, oh yeah, you'll want to do the front office stuff, but first we should start with the back office, because that includes all your key information about your customers, your products, your employees, etc. And we're going to want to have a web store, because these businesses are going to run web stores. The most important thing, he said, is that we want to run it on the web. They shouldn't have to manage their own databases and manage their own machines and all that stuff, and deal with upgrades and database software. And so at least he had the insight that Oracle software wasn't necessarily easy for the average small business to implement. So that sort of was the whole idea of the company in a 5-minute phone call.
It's amazing it could all be traced back to such a short phone call. How profound was it for you at the time? I'm sure you're speaking to a ton of different people, but looking back, how much do you think, wow, this is what shaped everything, or was it just business as usual? And
well, I mean, it was a fulfillment of me wanting to move into business software, but I didn't really know whether this was the right approach right away. And starting with accounting, I sort of took that to some degree on faith. I didn't know anything about accounting. I was a QuickBooks user, but like the first day we started the company, I had to go out and buy an accounting book. Fortunately, I got some other people later in the company that actually knew what they were doing on accounting. But it really actually came clear to me just a few months later. I was at a party actually at Larry's house, and Steve Jobs walked up and he said, Larry's super excited about this accounting in a browser thing, but does anyone want to do accounting in a browser? And at that point, I wasn't sure. So I honestly said, I don't know, I think so. I don't know. Larry seems to think so. But it was actually only seriously days later that we actually finished our first iteration of the accounting system. This was NetLedger, and we took our financials from QuickBooks, and we uploaded them into NetLedger. And I remember distinctly the first night taking a look at our financials of the company in the browser. And that was sort of the aha moment where I recognized, yeah, this is going to work. I mean, the fact that I can have my finger on the pulse of my business anytime, anywhere, from my experience running a company, I knew this was going to be huge, and it was just a matter of time. And of course, Larry never doubted for a second. He used to tell me, well, there's been mainframes and there's been client server, but this sort of web application thing. This is how applications are going to be run for the next 1,000 years. I don't know what's going to happen after that, but definitely for the next 1,000 years. And so he saw it right from the beginning, and I give him huge credit there. And to his credit, it was 3 months later that Mark Benioff came to me and he said, "Yeah, I'm starting one of these software companies delivered over the web for small companies, and it's going to be sales." And I said, "Yeah, it's good, smart sales, it's good stuff. That's what your pipeline, your opportunities, all that stuff." So, but that was great. I mean, Mark blazed an amazing trail and helped us a lot and helped the whole industry. So it was, takes a village.
And you have to give Larry Ellison credit for his foresight. He was thinking about web applications before. I don't even know if you could spell web application at the time.
Yeah.
So how did you develop a business model around something that a handful perhaps of people knew would be the future? You hardly weren't convinced at the time. How did you develop a business model around that?
Well, simple. We charged $9.99 a month or something. I mean, it was kind of flying by the seat of our pants to some degree, just to see who would whenever you start a company, it's a really cool idea. There's going to be some people out there that gravitate to it, but you don't know who they are, how much they're going to be willing to pay, what they're going to do with us. And we learned a lot in those first few years. There was certainly a bunch of early adopters that got it, and they, a lot of times those would be companies that were very geographically dispersed, that needed lots of people to be able to have access to the information, and the fact that you could do it on the web. Again, this is only 4 or 5 years from the advent of the internet, but there were definitely a lot of people that got it. Software as a service was definitely popularized by Salesforce.com and the whole no software movement. And while the thing that we had to deal with is that salespeople are a little less risk averse or more risk tolerant than, say, CFOs. And we were starting with accounting. I mean, we were ultimately delivering an entire suite, an entire system to run your business. But it was definitely starting with financials. And CFOs are inherently a more conservative bunch. So, over the next few years, the challenge was to find those sort of forward-looking CFOs, CEOs that were willing to take the leap into, putting their data on the internet. Now, for me, it was an easy conversation. I don't know that they always bought it, but it was pretty easy to convince them that rather than storing their key customer information on a computer under somebody's desk, that anyone could stick back then it was a disk in, or a USB flash drive or whatever, and steal all your business information, that maybe we could run it a little more securely than that. So it was, it was clear to me that they were going to get an increase in security when they went to that to software as a service. But it really took people getting used to it, certainly people getting more familiar with the internet in their personal lives, and to really start to trust it. And after a time, the CFOs, they did come along, and the CEOs, and they did come along. And, I used to argue with them. It's like, well, you're willing to put your sales information, and you really think that people what do they want to see? Your financials or your customer list? Your competitors probably want your customer list. If you're willing to do that, you've really kind of, already opened the barn door and let the horses out, as it were, though they really weren't doing that. I mean, we've run NetSuite incredibly securely over 20 years, and our customers have been able to really rely on the fact that their data in NetSuite is actually incredibly secure.
So the story of NetSuite is also the story of hyper growth, like starting out with 4 guys and then thousands of employees. How do you not only preserve the right culture, but also grow the right culture in a company that's growing so fast?
Yeah, well, it definitely starts with having a clear vision and mission that you're consistent with through the history of the company. I mean, we were lucky enough that in 5 minutes we came up with the idea of the company, really one system to run your business. All aspects of your key business processes, your sales, your accounting, your commerce, etc. So being able to get people to gravitate around a very clear mission and vision, a vision of how you want things to be. You want people to be able to run their business, securely on the web with one application, everybody working from the same playbook. That definitely helps. I mean, certainly, a lot of the culture comes from just alignment. We were kind of in an interesting place. I mean, we'd come from Oracle, a lot of us, and Oracle sold to enterprises. But we were, I'd run a small business. I had some understanding of small business. We kind of, our culture was we mashed up that more consumery culture, that a company like Intuit needs to reach the millions and millions of the Fortune 5 million, as it were, of smaller businesses. And the culture of Oracle, which is about building these powerful systems. So our first ad, we did a billboard, because everybody in 2000 did a billboard, and our billboard was a baby in a fighter jet. So this notion of kind of mashing up this ease of use with this incredible power. So I think that our culture really played off of that we needed to have a culture that was very approachable for smaller companies. They don't necessarily want this sort of hard driving enterprise culture, but also needed to be scalable. We were obviously planning to build a big company and reach. We wanted to reach, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands ultimately of businesses. And so, I think the vision and the mission and just kind of staying true to who our customers were and really sort of mirroring our customers is what I think led to a great culture that lives on today.
Was it difficult to attract the right employees? I mean, it's different today. You're an established brand, but at the time, no one knew you.
Yeah. Well, there's always people that want to take a leap, and I think, Silicon Valley was immersed in the internet, and so I think it was easier to explain. It was easier to explain what we were doing. It kind of just makes sense, and you just show someone how it works, and they're like, oh yeah, that's probably how applications should be for at least the next 1,000 years. So that was sort of helpful to attract some, amazing people into the organization. And certainly, if you treat your employees right and you make sure that they're motivated, that they, can work the way they want to work, and that they're learning, and that they feel a sense of purpose, it's just like a product. Your company is sort of a product in some sense, and you want them to recommend it to a friend or colleague, just like you want your product to be recommended. So, that's certainly a part of growing your company, is just the word of mouth you get from, hiring great employees, treating them like they're the great employees they are, and making them feel at home and motivated to succeed. That's how you can build up an organization.
So you said that one of the most important things you have learned while building NetSuite is how important it is that you can make changes, necessary changes, even though it might be painful. So how do you build an organization where the right people have the right information at the right time and the right authority to make those perhaps painful changes that needs to be done?
Yeah, I've talked about that a lot this week at Suite World. It's this notion that you need the visibility, first of all. So you need to know what's happening in your business. I talk about knowing past, present, and future, knowing what's happened historically, what's happening right now, and being able to visualize trends that indicate what might happen in the future. So it starts with that. So you have the visibility into what might happen. And then as you see it happening, you have to respond. And so that's where agility comes in. And everybody talks about agile software development, agile everything. And it can't be emphasized enough that you need to be able to respond to things that are happening that you see out there in the world. And there's a real tension. There's definitely a tension between making sure you're staying on mission, on vision, going towards your sort of true north. And the tension between that and responding to things that you're seeing in the marketplace. But you don't want to get diverted. And so, in growing our company, I think, it's definitely part of leadership to be able to identify those times that you do need to pivot, and then identifying those times where it's best not to pivot. And it's just leadership.
It's interesting you would say that. Nick Smith of Google, he said, the best companies, they can die from having too many opportunities instead of, too few.
For sure.
How do you see that North Star? How do you see that process of being true to what you want to achieve and not being diverted into shiny new items like all entrepreneurs can be?
Yeah, it takes some degree of courage, because you'll get some amazing opportunities, huge customers that'll come along and they'll try to get you going where they want to go. And the allure of the big customer and the big deal is one that's hard to resist. And sometimes it's the right thing to do. A lot of what we had to do in building NetSuite was figure out how to sort of mitigate the fact that some of our biggest customers could potentially take us into directions that we didn't want to go. And I think, I can tell you the technical solution we found, which is to develop a platform so it's easy to extend NetSuite. And then our customers or professional service people or our partners could extend NetSuite without us having to make a big investment. to the needs of particular customers or particular industries, et cetera. So that was sort of the technical solution. But I think in the bigger picture, what that's all about is trying to figure out a way that you can be flexible, and that may involve developing a partner channel or partners that can extend what you have. And this is not just in software, in anything. Partnerships are incredibly important, and partners can be a critical part of addressing some of these needs that are going to bring a bunch of resources into your company without getting off your path towards what your true North Star is. So the solution is different in every case, but obviously that's the major balance that you have to have. And every company obviously struggles with making sure they can get funded, that they can invest in what they want to do in the long term. And how do you balance, that with, if you want to get that funding, but you also want to stay on track and on point. I think at the end of the day, the focus is the most important thing, and I would always argue that entrepreneurs should, ultimately weigh staying on track and avoid things that risk going off track.
So could you please elaborate more on your decision-making process? By definition, we don't know what would have happened if we made another decision. And your job today is to make big decisions. How do you use other people as a sounding board? How do you think for yourself about the right solution to a problem that you're facing?
Well, no person is an island. And certainly if I look at the growth of NetSuite and what's made us successful, a lot of it has been that we built a lot of the company by consensus. It's not by committee. That's different. That's, you take a vote. But by consensus is, ultimately a leader has to decide. But a leader that does this in a vacuum is going to fail. And there's so many resources out there. Great resources for me was Larry. And, we generally did what Larry said, not maybe on the exact time frame that he said it, but he was always really incredibly supportive, saying, you're there every day running that business, and I don't see everything that you see. And I know it's terrifically hard to make some of these sort of wrenching changes. So at the end of the day, I do think it's getting all the data in from all the stakeholders, being really willing to listen, knowing when you might be wrong, but also having that persistence to stick with something that you truly know is right. And again, it comes down to that focus. When people try to distract you, give you advice about getting off track, you really have to come back to that center of what you're really trying to do in the world. And this is true for for-profit companies, for social enterprises, organizations that are trying to do great things in the world. Always come back to why you started in the first place and what you were trying to accomplish. And I think that's where success comes from.
Interesting. So if you look at the tech industry, they had some very charismatic leaders. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison comes to mind, and they've taken the company from their humble beginning into billion-dollar companies. You have gone through that journey yourself, personally and professionally. Which skills would you have to acquire along the way, and which phases?
Well, for me, I was only 3 years into running my own company. I was 30 years old. That's old now for an entrepreneur, but back then it was relatively young. There's so much you learn on the way. And again, a lot of it is about mentors. I had a great mentor in Larry. I had a great board of people that could advise me, and make liberal use of that. And they can, there's only so much time you have in a day, but time that you spend with someone who's seen the type of thing that you've seen before is time really well spent. And so as I said, I think it's ultimately, it devolves on you to make the hard decisions, and no one is going to care about it more than you. I'm still at NetSuite because I care about it very, very deeply. I like working at Oracle, but people say, once you're bought by Oracle, why didn't you go off into the sunset? It's because I truly care about what we do. I really believe in it. I think we have so much more left to do. And that, to me, is what it's really all about. That was our vision. Our vision wasn't a dollar figure or a number of users or whatever. Our vision was changing the world in our own way.
Perfect. And so in your world, you're just getting started in a way, like you're on that path, which is amazing. So how do you think about opportunity cost, in the sense that you only have so limited time? There are skills you would like to acquire. It's tempting to delegate things because you don't have time, but then again, you need to keep on developing as a human being.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Well, I mean,
balance?
it's definitely you got to figure out the things you're not going to learn and that you're not going to do. And one of the things for me is that I programmed for a very large history of NetSuite. I mean, one of the things, because it kept me really, really close to the technology, I loved doing it. It became less and less of the amount of time I could do it, but that was something that I was not going to easily give up. And I think in the early days, I had a big impact on the organization with that role. But at the end of the day, you got to figure out which are the things that someone else should be doing, because you can't do everything. And as someone that's an expert in a particular area, I mean, a lot of great entrepreneurs didn't necessarily grow up as general managers. Some may have, but a lot of them grew up doing it. Really being in there and seeing what worked and what didn't work and having a great idea. And so if you're one of those people, like for me, it was programming. I started as a programmer when I was a kid, and that's where all my company is really built out of programming. When you know something very, very deeply, I think that helps you recognize other people that know something very, very deeply. And I think identifying that talent, not necessarily understanding everything that they do, but identifying that those people are as good at what they do as what you do, and letting them go and do their job is absolutely critical, because you can't do everything and you can't learn everything. But then figuring out the areas that you are actually the expert in. And for me, I really, I was an expert in how to develop NetSuite. So even when I stopped programming, I stayed very involved in how, and remain very involved in how we develop NetSuite, because that's an area that I know so deeply. So I think, and ultimately, you build a great team of people that are experts in their area, that you trust, that you believe in, and you let them go and do what they have to do.
So as a coder, it might be easier to say you had a good day. You can see what you built, which gives you some sort of satisfaction. You're in a very different role today. What is a good day?
Well, I'm measured though. Yeah, I get some numbers that tell me whether I'm doing my job right or not. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I was thinking you're measured. Yes, you can grow revenue, and perhaps that's why one of the ways that you're seeing.
Oh, it's one of the critical metrics. There's no doubt about it.
But for instance, something like building an organization, you don't get the same short-term reward.
Adrenaline rush.
Well, I guess you could say that you don't run the code and say, okay, it works.
Yeah.
You'll get a feedback much later. How's that, or
yeah?
how's it?
For me, the feedback from programming was never just that it works. For me, was that it worked for someone. I mean, ever since I was a kid, what excited me about programming, it was exciting to make it work and solve that sort of puzzle, but the most exciting thing was when someone else used it and it provided value to them. And so to me, it's kind of the same thing. Even if I'm not programming, if I put out there, some new capabilities and I help promote them and I get people to adopt them. I mean, one of the most important things we do as an organization is go out to our customers. We have something called advanced customer support, which is people go out to our customers, look at how they're using NetSuite, help them optimize the use of NetSuite. And there's always a ton of things that they don't know about. They always come to us and say, gosh, I know I could get more out of NetSuite. So to me, when you go out, and that's almost more instant in some sense, you go out there and you help someone adopt something within the technology that really helps them on a day-to-day basis, helps them get their job done easier and faster. That's to me is the sort of instant gratification. And that's what I always kind of wanted out of programming anyway. So the programming is, it's not Field of Dreams. They will not just, if you build it, they won't just come. And it's a lot of your hard work is to promote the technology, get people to understand the technology, adapt the technology to the particular needs of a business. They're all different, and they all are going to use the system in a different way. And so to me, I get just as much a charge up. I mean, here at Sweet World, meeting customers from all different walks of life, all kinds of incredibly cool companies doing amazing stuff. I met a company that has farms that grow seeds for other farms. Okay, I didn't even know such a thing existed. And they use NetSuite, and he talked about the parts of the system that he loves. So that's always been the most exciting thing for me from the very, very beginning. All the not-for-profits that we're helping to do good better, as we say, and we have some, amazing ones. Obviously, we talked about American Cancer Society, gigantic not-for-profit that's doing so much good in the world. That's definitely the thing that gives me that. And everybody in the organization can feel that. The programmers, the people running the cloud operations, the service, the salespeople, the people delivering customer service, the people running the finance portions of the organization, they can all get that same sort of, what I think is the ultimate adrenaline rush, that you've helped someone succeed.
So you've been mentored by Larry Ellison. You had fantastic mentors in your career. What would your piece of advice be for the next generation entrepreneurs who might also be looking for a mentor?
To find a mentor?
To find a mentor,
yeah,
yes.
That's a good question. I mean, obviously you should be looking for them your whole career from day one. And there's a lot of things that go into that mentorship. I mean, you obviously need to have chemistry. I mean, it's like any relationship in your life. You obviously have to have an enormous amount of respect, but you have to see that they respect you, and that that you kind of each sort of grok each other. And so I think it's just a process of just being out there, get out of your hole or whatever, where you do, your cube or your table or whatever. Get out in the world, and you don't know where it's going to come from, and it might not even be in the same industry. I definitely hear stories of people with mentors in completely different industries, and that's not going to suffice. You're going to need people that understand very, very deeply what you do. But a lot of times, some of the hardest decisions are people decisions, and you might find people in other industries that have, you might find people in the military. You might find people, that are teachers. I mean, you might find people or principals of schools or whatever, what have you, that have amazing people experience. And ultimately, as I said, leadership, is so much of it is attracting, retaining great people, getting them to be working towards that same vision and mission, towards that same North Star. And so mentorship in that regard can come from a lot of different places.
Which piece of advice would you give yourself if you had to go back to 1998, whenever you founded NetSuite?
Chill out. It's all going to be fine. No, so I look back and I look back more, and not so much what I wish I hadn't done, but what I'm happy that I did. And I think this is the most important advice I can give everybody, is that that success is fantastic, but only because you're delivering on the sort of promise that you made to yourself to make a difference in the world and make a dent in the universe, what have you. And so I think staying focused on the little victories, the first customer, the 10th customer, the 100th customer, in some sense is more important than the 1000th customer, and will probably have a bigger impact on you. That first time you see the product that you built make a difference in people's lives is way more important, really, at the end of the day, that it's 1 million people. I mean, that's, our brains did not evolve to even understand what 1 million people is. I mean, so if 1 million people use your product or 1 billion people use your product, I mean, we tout the numbers all the time. But at the end of the day, what's most satisfying is the one person that you're with, that you're seeing, that's using the product and is telling you how it's made an impact in their life. And the first one that does that, in some sense, is the most impactful. So I guess appreciating all of the milestones along the way, because you're never done. And for anybody that's an entrepreneur, it's like, it's just like, the Golden State Warriors, they win a championship, and then they celebrate for, Bob Myers. I talked to Bob Myers. He's like, yeah, I celebrate for like an hour. And then I'm like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do next year? And so realize that is going to happen. And if you can take the time, especially in the early days, to really appreciate those initial victories, because that's as big as anything you'll ever do, no matter how big your product or service becomes.
So you are extremely successful and have worked with extremely successful people. And I know I'm just putting you on the spot here, but how much is luck and how much is skill in your experience?
Well, it's 73% luck and it's 27% skill. Luck has a huge impact. And, that I landed at Oracle and I met Larry Ellison and we hit it off and we, had some similar thoughts about what to do. I mean, that my business was sort of failing at the time that Larry had this idea that we needed to deliver software over the web. I mean, that's serendipity. If my business was sort of succeeding and a couple years later, I realized that, someone else may have started NetSuite. And so there's a ton of luck. And nevertheless, being out there and working hard and kind of just keeping your eyes open about what's happening in the world, I mean, that's going to only help you get that luck, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah. Evan Goldberg, thank you so much for making yourself available for the Investors Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.